what's up? I'm Channel Pup, attempting to be the mascot for the level-headed fanboy. Welcome to a very special video. This is one that's been a long time coming. I think 2 years since this game was announced, and now we are here. Marvel's Spider-Man 2, the highly anticipated latest installment in the Insomniac Spider-Man Games series. So if you're not already familiar with my channel, you will know that I am about as big of a Spider-Man fan as can be. I made a retrospective series on all the films. I've played and loved the 2 prior installments in the Insomniac Spidey series. While I've had my issues with certain decisions made with the gameplay, these have really just been very minor, as these are pretty much on every level excellent video games that do really cool things with the Spider-Man IP. So half a decade after the beginning of Insomniac's Spidey journey, we're here now with Marvel's Spider-Man 2, and today, my friends, we'll be reviewing it from top to bottom. Now, a heads up for those who haven't played it, this review is going to contain spoilers, but for now, if you want to know whether or not I recommend Marvel's Spider-Man 2, I will go right ahead and say absolutely 100% yes. This game has my absolute fullest endorsement. It is definitely worth the full price. Heck, if you need a reason to buy a PlayStation 5, this is a solid one. This game was my main reason for buying a PlayStation 5 in the first place, despite just being interested in the console because I like games and you gotta keep up with these generational shifts. And of the few games that have released exclusively for new-gen consoles, Marvel's Spider-Man 2 is probably the most indicative of what the future new-gen experiences have to offer, and I am absolutely here for every bit of it. But also, if you're a Spider-Man fan, you're getting a terrific adventure out of this. Everything that was great about the previous Insomniac Spider-Man games is here, and has, for the most part, been improved upon with new layers to the experience. We've got something here that has everything I adored about all of the previous Spider-Man games, including the ones made under Activision. It's all brought together in a game that feels like the culmination of everything those games achieved and learned over the decades. The game isn't perfect, mind you. I did encounter some bugs, including 3 softlocks. Your enjoyment of the game's storyline will hinge a lot on suspension of disbelief, more so than a lot of other Spidey stories. So don't let the photorealistic visuals fool you. This is by and large a very comic booky story, while also delivering some very unique, very out there takes on familiar Spidey lore, particularly with Venom. So if you're expecting something logical, super grounded, and makes just total, absolute, pristine sense, well, this one doesn't entirely land in that regard, but it does land on a thematic level. So if you are a stickler for logical lapses and plot holes, this one might not be for you. But of course, it is a game at the end of the day, and gameplay is the big factor here, and the gameplay is as good as can be. So there you go. If you love Spider-Man and Spidey content, be sure to hit subscribe, you won't be disappointed. And if you're a returning viewer and you love what I do, maybe check out the Patreon link in the description below to further support the channel. It'd mean a lot to me. Right, from here on, we're going Spoiler Town. If you haven't played the game and spoilers are a deal breaker for you, now is the time to click off of this video. So the major selling point for this one is that you've got not 1, but 2 Spider-Men for this game, as we play as both Peter Parker and Miles Morales, as their respective Spideys. So Spider-Man 2 is kind of bringing together both Spider-Man PS4 and Spider-Man Miles Morales. And like the previous games, New York is a fully open world with a main story to follow and different objectives that pertain to said main story. And these can branch off into different optional side stories, etc, etc. You know Spider-Man games, you know how this works. You can do everything at your own pace. If you want to take a breather to explore the expanded New York map looking for goodies or crimes to stop, there is ample breathing room between missions, at least in the first half for you to do so. The world is truly your oyster this time, as we've effectively doubled up on everything. Double the Spideys, and a New York map that is double the size. With the main story, typically you will be required to play as a specific Spidey for the sake of the story making sense. However, for most of the side quests in the open world, you are free to choose your favorite of the 2 Spideys. There are also missions where you are required to ditch the Spidey suit and play as Peter or Miles, as well as missions where you'll take control of another character entirely, including the return of the admittedly rather unwelcome Mary Jane stealth missions from the first game, which were the absolute weakest part of that one, and we'll get into that later. The villain roster this time around is also really strong. We had a solid villains roster including the Sinister Six in the first Insomniac Spider-Man game, before getting significantly smaller C-listers in the roster for the Spider-Man Miles Morales game. The problem you run into, and Activision certainly ran into this, is that when you've got a lot of brilliant major players in the first game, you can have a situation where you end up scraping the barrel for the follow-up, like we had with Spider-Man 2 Enter Electro back in the day. For Spider-Man 2 though, not only do we at least have a solid selection of new enemies we're up against, but this game also double dips and brings back a handful of the enemies that we were up against in the first game. Like in the previous Insomniac Spidey games, you got a primary villain and a secondary villain, and then all of the other villains that just kind of feed into their stories. The first game having Mr. Negative and Doc Ock, the second having the Tinker and Simon Krieger, and this game having Kraven the Hunter and Venom. Both villains being even more of a menacing presence than the villains of the previous games, with Kraven especially being a huge surprise as he's a very difficult villain to get right, but they absolutely nailed him. So, let's talk the story. So in Spider-Man 2, Peter is trying to hold down a job as a substitute teacher at Brooklyn Vision's Academy, but a textbook case of Parker luck occurs as Miles needs his help to suit up and take on the Sandman, who is causing trouble downtown. Abandoning his post at Brooklyn Visions leads to Peter losing his job as a substitute teacher. Something has triggered Sandman's return to being a kaiju sand monster though. He's been driven to this. He's been hunted. And that brings us to our main story. So the absurdly wealthy military force that is Kraven and his seemingly endless army of hunters descend upon New York City and bust out inmates at the Raft facility, kidnapping them, strengthening them up, and then releasing them into the city for Kraven to hunt down, as he searches for an opponent that can actually equal him. These inmates include Scorpion and Martin Lee, but they're not his only targets, as he also has his sights set on the Lizard, Black Cat, Electro, Vulture, Shocker, and Tombstone. Now with Miles, he's having to confront Martin Lee for the first time since Lee killed his father Aaron Davis, and he's been wrangling with his feelings of vengeance. He wants Lee dead, and it's impacting his life in serious ways as he obsesses over the idea that killing Lee, or letting him die, would protect his family. Now there's a moment here that is a cool scene, but I did wonder if it felt a little bit character assassination-y for Miles. This is when he first confronts Lee. He's on this jetty and the raft ship has been overturned and its propeller is chomping away at the jetty below. And so all of the civilians on that jetty are at risk of falling into the propeller. But once Miles has his sights set on Lee, Lee is all he focuses on. It's Peter who rescues these civilians. Miles does, of course, rescue other civilians before and after this moment, but what we effectively have here is a scene of our new Spider-Man ignoring civilians in immediate mortal danger because he's focused on exacting revenge, and I'm not sure how I feel about the optics of that. This is, of course, the start of an arc, but the fact that this happened after the events of the Miles Morales game where he's effectively learned what it means to be Spider-Man, it felt a little odd to me. There are, however, things that mitigate this somewhat. When there's danger, even in cutscenes, we see the Spider-Sense graphic above Spidey's head, and we don't see it here for Miles, so perhaps his Spider-Sense knew that the other Spidey had it under control. As it is, he does go and save people, he's just a bit late because he was so distracted. I guess it just feels weird to me that had Peter not been here, this scene would have been a bloodbath. At the same time, though, maybe Miles wouldn't have allowed himself to get so entranced in the first place had Peter not been there. It's pretty difficult to say. I get the feeling this scene's going to be divisive. But you know what? We're challenging the character, and I think that's a good thing. I guess it's one of those things where there's not really anything objectively wrong here, it just feels wrong, and it's supposed to because this sets Miles on his arc, where rather than thinking of vengeance, he needs to let himself heal. It needs to be said, there's a real sense of finality to this game, as a large theme is Miles making peace with what happened to Aaron Davis. Peter is showing signs of outgrowing Spider-Man and looking to save the world using his intellectual gifts rather than his physical ones. We've got a lot of reformed villains here. Black Cat's story gets a nice conclusion with her headed to Paris to be with her girlfriend. And this game also extracts a heavy toll on the Insomniac Spider-Man universe, with various A-list Spider-Man villains being killed off. We see Kraven kill the Scorpion with his own stinger, Shocker is confirmed dead, and it's certainly hinted at that Kraven has killed Electro and Vulture, as their costumes are on display like trophies, and we know Kraven doesn't take prisoners. So Scorpion, Vulture, Shocker, and Electro dead? These are like the go-to brawn enemies for Spidey stories. You need a boss fight, these guys are your man, or Rhino, who isn't in this game at all, which makes for a nice break because he's in pretty much every Spider-Man game. But these aren't the only guys to get iced. What's the motivation for Kraven coming to New York? He's terminally ill, and he wants to find an equal to defeat him in battle because he doesn't want to die of his illness. He's basically picking a fight with some of the most dangerous people in the world, hoping they can actually beat him, which makes him a villain with nothing to lose. This is all a game to him, and if he dies, he wins. What makes Kraven so refreshing is that in Spider-Man PS4 and Spider-Man Miles Morales, our main villains were generally people connected to both Peter and Miles, sympathetic adversaries. Kraven isn't related to either Peter or Miles, and he's also completely irredeemable. Kraven is utterly cruel. A large theme of Marvel's Spider-Man 2 is healing and reform. A great many of Spidey's adversaries have been reformed and go on to lead better lives, one example being Dr. Curtis Connors. Becoming the Lizard cost him his family, but he's finally getting his life back on track, only for Kraven to capture him and force him to transform back into the Lizard. What's so effective here is that the villains we're usually fighting, we're instead trying to protect. Thematically, this is pretty similar to Spider-Man No Way Home. We've got a situation where we view Spidey's rogues gallery in a sympathetic light, and Spidey is trying to save them. While all of this is going on, Harry Osborn is finally out of his symbiosis treatment tank, with his disease, the same disease that killed his mother Emily Osborn, now in remission. And his first order of business is to resume the mission he and Peter set out to do in their childhood. He's going to heal the world in honor of Emily Osborn and May Parker, with his best buddy Peter by his side. Harry Osborn possesses the power of the symbiote, an alien substance researched by Dr. Connors, and when Peter and Harry's superhero alter egos are revealed to each other, the two team up to fight against Kraven and rescue Spidey's old enemies, with Harry taking on the appearance of Agent Venom. But when Peter is killed by Kraven, the symbiote leaves and Harry transfers this over to Peter to save him. And thus, Peter gains the black suit. Now, I'm a little torn on this fake-out Peter death, because I felt nothing. It was obvious where this was going. It was obvious Peter would survive this, because not only do we know how this story goes, Peter in the black suit is literally plastered all over the marketing of this thing. So we know he's gonna get the black suit and that he's gonna live past this. But it begs the question, would this scene feel incomplete without this fake-out death? It was, of course, necessary for Peter to suffer some kind of ailment only the symbiote could recover to justify it transferring over to him. But did it need to be so dramatic to achieve that? I guess the game needs to convince us that it's necessary for the symbiote to go over to Peter, but is it worth all this if we're not gonna feel anything because we know what happens next? This opens up the dilemma of, should a story be influenced by its marketing? For example, if marketing reveals that this character will survive past this point, is it worth even bothering with a fake-out death? To be honest, I don't think there's any easy answer to that. I think everyone is going to have a different take. My take is, I don't know. I suppose it's like rewatching a movie where maybe the first time you had an inkling that maybe the protagonist wasn't going to make it this time, but upon rewatching, you know the story, you know they're going to make it. The question becomes, why even bother rewatching something if you know what's going to happen? Because it's a good story nonetheless. So I guess this works. I'm of the belief that writing shouldn't be influenced by a marketing campaign in that way. So I'm fine with this. Of course, as the symbiote is growing and maturing, gaining a personality of its own, it begins to change Peter. And you can see Peter's temperament changing over the course of the story to a more impatient one. This less restrained, more powerful Peter becomes Kraven's last hunt, as he tracks him down to the Emily May Foundation and has his hunters level the place. It's after Spidey's cured the lizard, and Connors reveals to him that the symbiote is an alien that he needs to get rid of, where things take a major turn. The suit evolves into a terrifying new design, and Peter goes home where he blacks out. When the hunters arrive, the symbiote takes full control, and the game transforms into a nightmarish survival horror as you navigate Queens as Mary Jane in search of Peter. During all this, Kraven manages to trap Miles, imprisoning him and forcing him to kill Martin Lee, and we get an incredible boss fight against Lee before Miles sets Lee free and asks him to find Peter and send him over to rescue him. Martin Lee is changed by Miles' act of kindness and commits to being better. Peter wakes up from his blackout on a bench in the city, and there's such an uncanny atmosphere to this scene where he makes his way back over to Harry and MJ, both traumatized by the night before. And after willingly withholding the symbiote from Harry, you know, the one thing keeping him alive, Peter heads over to Kraven's hideout to rescue Miles and defeat Kraven once and for all. Just when Peter is about to deliver the final blow, killing Kraven, Miles steps in, rescuing him, as Kraven watches a battle between these two Spider-Men play out, and things get seriously dark. Once Peter has Miles in a hold, declaring that the symbiote makes him a better Spider-Man, I got absolute chills. What we're looking at here is a pure, vicious monster that fully believes it is what Spider-Man is supposed to be, believing brutality and murder to be the key to keeping the city safe, just like how Miles previously believed that Lee's death would be key to keeping his loved ones safe. Miles eventually gets through to Peter, and the two work together to get the symbiote off of him before sealing it in a container. So Peter heads back to Oscorp with the container, only to be confronted by Harry, who is bloody fuming that Peter withheld his cure from him for so long. Peter now knows that the symbiote is a danger and that Connors was right, but Harry views this as just another excuse and breaks the container, understandably, freeing the symbiote, which bonds to Harry, transforming him into Venom, an uncontrollable force hell-bent on helping his symbiote brethren to take over the world. Venom goes to find the Clintar meteorite the symbiote arrived on and uses it to expand the symbiote form across Manhattan with intentions of expanding it across the entire globe, convincing Harry that this will heal the world. And from there, we watch as the symbiotes completely take over Manhattan, transforming it into a hellscape full of eldritch horrors. Venom also briefly transforms Mary Jane into Scream for a boss fight against Peter. This did a nice job of bringing home that while Spider-Man must fight the symbiotes, these are forcing him to fight the ones he loves too. He must be as merciful as he is swift and efficacious to defeat them. One thing I didn't quite get though is why Peter is taking everything Scream was saying to heart, when he probably ought to understand that that's just the symbiote talking. Unless maybe he feels there's a hint of truth to what the symbiote is saying, which I get. That's why he maybe feels obligated to respond directly? I'm not so sure, but while I was playing this fight, I was just thinking the whole time, Peter, you big goof, don't take it so personally. That's clearly Scream talking, not MJ. Anyways, MJ with the help of Peter manages to bust out of the symbiote, and they're back in the game. When Peter and Miles go to attempt to contain the invasion at City Hall, they are bombarded with symbiotes, and the symbiote once again takes over Peter, this time leaving him in a catatonic state. So Martin Lee and Miles combine their powers to enter Peter's mind and save him, ensuring the symbiote can never control him again. This has a neutralizing effect on Peter's symbiote, giving Peter an anti-venom form, which affords him the power of the symbiote while isolating it from the symbiote hive mind, meaning Peter cannot be controlled by the symbiote. You know what this reminds me of? Sonic Frontiers, where Sonic's cyber corruption is transformed into Supersonic 2, allowing him all of the power of cyberspace without it destroying him. I'm sure this is just an anime trope. It does come off as awfully convenient, as he now basically just has a symbiote suit with all of the perks and none of the negatives. And we don't even know what becomes of this suit later in the game. Like, does Peter just have a symbiote now? Is he going to be like this going forward? Is that just what Spider-Man is now. So this brings us to the final battle. Peter, Miles, and MJ strategize. Peter will lure Venom away from the meteor, MJ will retrieve it, while Miles protects her from the horde of symbiotes. While Venom is preoccupied with Peter, Miles will put the asteroid in the particle accelerator at the Emily May Foundation, destroying it, and eliminating the symbiotes altogether. But ahead of this, Peter is warned by Connors that removing the symbiote from Harry, yes, it will neutralize the threat, but Harry's too far gone. Removing him from the symbiote will kill him. Spider-Man can surely find a way though, right? He always does. The plan hits a snag though when Venom realizes he's been had. He grows wings just like in the 2018 Venom comics and heads over to the Emily May Foundation to retrieve the meteorite. But he's stopped by Miles, who retrieves the meteorite from him and then uses his bioelectricity to charge up the particle accelerator and destroy it, while Peter and Harry work together to get Harry unbound from the symbiote. They succeed, but like Connors warned, Harry dies. In a last-ditch effort to save him, Miles uses his bioelectricity to jumpstart his heart. He succeeds, but now Harry is comatose with very little signs of brain activity, and a now desperate Norman Osborn blaming this on the two Spider-Men, prepping the G serum. And you know what that means. He's also seeking the help of Dr. Octavius, setting up a potential Green Goblin and Doc Ock team-up for the villains for the next game, with Doc Ock declaring the final chapter. Mary Jane finally moves in with Peter at Aunt May's old home, where he set up a new, smaller version of the Emily May Foundation, and with that, Peter is indefinitely retired as Spider-Man, with Miles now ready to take on New York City by himself. In the most hideous costume he's ever worn, seriously, what is up with this? And that's the story. Honestly, I love the theme of how desperation can keep us from healing. Kraven came to New York because he didn't want to be beaten by his illness. Harry succumbed to the symbiote because he didn't want to give in to his illness. Lee became a terrorist and killed Miles' father because he blamed Norman for the death of his own father. Miles was almost another link in that chain, almost giving into his darkness when what he really needed was to just heal, just as Lee should have. Same goes for Spider-Man, succumbing to the darkness of the symbiote because it makes it feel easier for him to be Spider-Man. So the game has an anti-morphine stance, I take it. Thematically, everything lands. Peter's friendship with Harry is also very believable and well established in the flashbacks, despite the fact that we didn't actually see Harry in the previous games, or at least not outside of his little tank. I also liked MJ a lot more in this game than in the first. In the first, she felt kind of just like a nuisance in that she kept getting herself into trouble and then just kind of taking Spider-Man for granted, and would then get all upset about how she relies on Spider-Man, while her and Peter's relationship was in this very will-they-won't-they stage. It felt like their attempt at making her more independent kind of backfired, and yeah. In this game, though, she's making compromises to follow her own dreams. She's still trying to be a journalist, she's still very independent, but she gets to interact more with the expanded cast of this story. And we get to see her just kind of let her hair down, quite literally, and have fun, like at the carnival. She feels more like a person here, less like a mandate, and I really appreciate the improvements made to her character. The storytelling of Marvel's Spider-Man 2, honestly, it's simply excellent. But you do need to be kind of willing to accept that, while everything has a very realistic aesthetic, this story is very comic booky. Kraven is effectively a superhuman, Mary Jane has an absurd amount of plot armor, getting chucked about from heights that'd surely break some bones, and getting up easy breezy. This is a story where we have talking rocks. And another thing is, you kind of have to accept that this version of Venom is different. From the outset, that's obvious. It's not Eddie Brock. The game is pretty honest about this version of Venom being a reimagining. I have a physical copy of the game, and on the back of the box it says, and I quote, "Fight Kraven the Hunter, Lizard, and an original take on Venom, and many more." They're being very upfront about this. Typically what makes Venom tick is that the symbiote and Eddie Brock bond over their mutual hatred of Peter Parker, and they're pretty much on the same page about that while also refusing to harm innocents. That said, their definition of innocence can be a bit fuzzy, as association with Peter can deem a person a target in their eyes. These elements are kinda here, but I guess remixed, shall we say, with Harry's hatred of Peter being a catalyst for his bond with Venom, but once he and Venom are bonded, it's the symbiote doing all the talking, while Harry realizes it's a mistake, and Venom's motives are effectively to take over the world. Now, Harry and Venom are kinda on the same page in that they both want to, quote, heal the world, but Venom's idea of healing the world is total invasion, where Harry's is to, do, good things. As I say, this really just feels like a remix of the character in that there's so much Venom and symbiote lore present here, especially with Agent Venom, the Clintar asteroid, Scream. It's all just been very differently executed, and I'm honestly okay with that. Also, Venom's design just looks fantastic. He looks a lot like the current Sonyverse movie Venom, but with a big white spider on his chest. Perfect. Absolutely perfect. This whole story feels like it's repurposing existing ideas to tell a new story. Harry's motivations are pretty much lifted directly from The Amazing Spider-Man 2. Kraven hunting down the lizard is very reminiscent of the Spider-Man 3 movie game. And then we've got a total symbiote invasion of Manhattan, which is pulled straight from Spider-Man Web of Shadows. But it all results in a story that feels fresh. It shows that even if this is very much an Elseworlds depiction of Spidey's world, it's clearly made with a love of the source material across the entire tenure, as this is full of elements from the 616 comics, the original Leon Ditko run, the 2018 Venom comics, Ultimate Spider-Man. It's all on display here, delivering my favorite story of the three that we have in this universe so far. But this is a video game at the end of the day, so how's the gameplay? So our two Spideys, Peter and Miles, both have a shared set of abilities, these being the quintessentially Spidey abilities, as well as some of their very own signature moves. Let's start with the traversal. Everything anyone loves about an open-world Spidey game is here. Web swinging, wall crawling, but for this game, they've built a lot more on top of these fundamentals. Going from Spider-Man PS4 to Spider-Man Miles Morales, a lot of new gameplay improvements were brought to the formula with more of an emphasis on in-air stunts while web swinging. And these improvements have been carried over to Peter for this game too. While his web swinging stunts are still a different overall style to Miles, you can be a lot more expressive in your movements now as both Spideys, which is great because in the first game when compared to Miles, Peter's movements really weren't anywhere near as fluid or exciting, with a very limited set of in-air stunts. But it's not just Peter who's received upgrades in the traversal department, as both Spideys are kitted out with some new ways to really experiment with the web swinging on the skill tree. For starters, you're now able to slingshot yourself from any point in the city, to get a really nice high velocity launch. A lot more of the velocity that you get from this, and of course the velocity that you get from diving, carries over into your swing arcs than before. Swinging is now a lot more influenced by momentum, but you can also use that high velocity to swing in loop-de-loops as well as navigate tight corners without losing your speed by spinning a horizontal web. These are excellent additions, but that's not all. I was really pleased with the new additions that added a whole new layer of depth to the web swinging that I've just talked about. But tucked away in the options menu are further web swinging options, including swing assist and fall damage. So obviously I chose to enable fall damage. Fall damage just makes the entire thing more engaging and compels me to really put the effort into good web swinging. But then there's the swing assist slider, which is just turned up to maximum from the get-go. So when turned up, it effectively acts the way web swinging did in the previous Insomniac Spider-Man games, where there's a minimum height at which you can swing at, and the steering is just nice and simple. The game basically protects you from screwing up your web swinging with the swing assist on, but if you turn it all the way down, something incredible happens. The height limit is removed, meaning that you can now slam face first into cars if you swing too low. What I love so much about this is getting as low as I can without smacking into cars. It makes me feel like a ninja. Now you actually have to put the work in to gain the height necessary to continually swing, and if you time it incorrectly, you can just swing straight into the pavement. Without swing assist, you also need to put a bit more effort into steering Spidey, as he will naturally pull towards the building he's swinging from, which is physics. Hooray! I didn't expect this. I never took this for granted. I wasn't a huge fan of the way that web swinging was handled in Spider-Man PS4, feeling it was hand-holdy to the point of being a little restrictive, and I do get why. Clearly, going by some of the people I've encountered on Twitter, not everyone sees the appeal in mastering web swinging as a high-stakes sport, and when the game is far more narrative-driven, I get why they would kind of put web swinging to the wayside and make it more of a way of getting from A to B. I'd accepted the fact that these games on an objective level handled web swinging in a way that was accessible even if it wasn't my preference. I did not ever expect them to include a load of options to make web swinging skill-based and momentum-based. They've implemented ideas and features I've been asking for since Spider-Man 2, the movie game, back on the PlayStation 2. Ideas I'd long given up on. Ideas I'd been begging for, and ideas that I was clowned on en masse by Twitter for even suggesting would improve these games, and they're here now, and they're wonderful. Not only am I absolutely adoring this new improved web swing system, I'm also enjoying the smug vindication. But there's also a brand new layer to in-air traversal in this game in the form of web wings that Spidey can use to glide through the city. These are momentum-based in that you have to work to retain your velocity while gliding, otherwise you won't get very far. There's a lot of options for how you can achieve that velocity though. This can be going from a free fall into a glide, or going from a slingshot into a glide, looking for windy areas of the city and updrafts which propel you upwards and forwards. You could also use the velocity from a really good swing, and then okay, once you got the velocity, that's great, but you gotta retain the velocity, so you kinda need to ebb and flow a little bit, you know, catch that wind. Also returning from Spider-Man Miles Morales, Miles using his Venom abilities can gain additional height with his Venom jump. They've doubled up on this, though, with a version of this move that gains you forward momentum instead of upward. This also transfers over to Peter, and he can do the same thing using shockwaves from his own set of mechanical spider legs on his back. And these can net you additional velocity while gliding. And you can catch such serious speed while gliding. And combining this with your different web swinging options makes traversing this city an absolute Spidey wet dream. Marvel's Spider-Man 2 has easily the best in-air traversal system in any Spider-Man game, which means the Spider-Man 2 movie game, after all these years, is finally officially dethroned when it comes to the web swinging. And don't come at me talking about Web of Shadows because it's not comparable. Getting from A to B is now a joyous task, but if you don't want to engage so much with it, you also have the option to just swing as you did before with a much lower skill floor. And since this isn't listed as an accessibility feature, I feel okay calling it baby mode. So you don't need to come at me anymore for asking for momentum-based web swinging back. I've got that, you've got baby mode, it's a win-win. Is there still some room for improvement? Sure, but it's minute at this point. It'd still be cool if we could swing from two webs, or if we could perform the web slingshot in the air rather than exclusively while grounded. As I say though, like, that's just two things. Two things. If two things are the only thing I can think of to expand this further, like, you've done good. You've done good, Insomniac. As for the wall traversal, there's not really been any changes here. Wall crawling remains pretty situational, you will rarely need to use this, as wall running proves more effective once again. I still think there's more that can be mined from wall traversal, as proven by previous games under Activision. Sadly, wall running only offers 180-degree movement, like before, with no possibility of running down the wall, just up and sideways. And then there's still no form of wall combat, which just feels like a bit of a missed opportunity, given that the latter part of this game clearly takes a great deal of inspiration from Spider-Man Web of Shadows, complete with symbiote-infected people roaming the streets who can surely climb walls. So to be able to fight these guys on the walls would have been sweet, but okay, it's not here. And again, it's a small thing. Just a small thing in the grand scheme of things. Combat has also been expanded upon with lots of fun new moves. My favorites being throwing enemies from side to side with a web and bonking them on the head with their own weapons. In this game, it's not just all about winning the fight, you can just fuck with them. Miles' Venom-enhanced abilities return from his spin-off game. I gotta stop calling them Venom abilities, because that's just gonna get confusing. Bioelectricity is, I think, the official name. But with that in mind, Peter isn't left at a disadvantage, as his gadgets, including his mechanical arms, deal the same amount of damage and are put to much better use than they were in the first game. And once again, you gain the power of the symbiote. You get signature moves with the symbiote too. These signature moves can also be switched and swapped around. With that being said, gadgets have been significantly simplified compared to the previous titles, with a much smaller selection of gadgets in the toolkit, and you can only wield 4 at a time. This does improve the flow of combat, as you'll no longer be slowing the pacing down to choose a gadget from the control wheel, but if you enjoyed things like web bombs and impact webs, you'll be disappointed by their absence here. Personally, I didn't find myself using the gadgets a huge deal in the previous games, favoring free-flow, fast-paced combat, so honestly, this works for me, maybe even better than before. But again, if you really enjoyed that gadget wheel, I can understand why you'd feel let down. There is a new parry move as well, which becomes pretty integral to combat in the latter part of the game, and can be a superb way of speeding up the pace of battle when it comes to brute enemies. It's incredibly satisfying to pull off, but if you're struggling to get the timing down, you can opt for a slightly increased parry time in the options menu. There are also surge meters. Miles can unleash a huge blast of his Venom sting, bioelectricity, whatever the fuck, and Peter, when equipped with the symbiote, can go into symbiote surge mode, which is an extreme power trip as the symbiote's full power is unleashed. Enemies can't even block you when you're in this state. You are a weapon of mass destruction, and it is so satisfying to use. The symbiote is a game changer this time. No longer feeling like just kind of an enhanced Spidey like in the Spider-Man 3 movie game or Web of Shadows. No. This suit is a monster, and it is incredibly satisfying to play in. Also, let's talk about stealth real quick. Miles still has an advantage over Peter in this department in that he can turn invisible for a brief time. But further improvements have been made to the stealth here, which I must add is rarely mandatory. This game, for the first time in any Spidey game, allows us to make our own web lines to walk on. More than one if we choose. I absolutely love this new mechanic. I love making my own little web to sit in and thinking about that scene of Peter making his own web to draw the lizard in the Amazing Spider-Man 1. Now I will say this. At the start of the game, there is a fair bit of downtime as we catch up with these characters. There's quite a lot of consecutive cutscenes stacked one on top of the other, and you'll be spending a fair bit of time outside of your suit as Peter and Miles. One of your first objectives in this game, after that big opener with Sandman, is to tidy Aunt May's old house before going on a bicycle ride with Harry Osborn. These are, of course, immersive elements that serve the cinematic nature of the story. However, I could understand why new players might be a little impatient to get back in the suit and return to the super-powered antics. This is a narrative-driven game, though, at the end of the day, so like a cinematic blockbuster, it usually paces itself with some form of downtime after a big action event. That being said, there's still a lot of incredibly exciting gameplay on display here. At the end of the game's first act, Peter, Harry, and MJ go for a night out at Coney Island. From a storytelling perspective, this is one of the game's many highlights, as it does an excellent job conveying the friendship between these three characters. It's a high point in Peter's story as his best friend is back on his feet, he's landed his dream job, and MJ seems to be doing well too. But it's after MJ discovers that J. Jonah Jameson didn't publish her story on the front page when suddenly the Hunters attack, culminating in an incredible set piece. The thing that makes this so exceptional is that you're not just seeing these characters have a good time, you are right there with them. How did they achieve this? Well, around Coney Island there are various activities and games, most of which are optional, but honestly you do not want to miss out on a single one of these. Some of these are mini-games including shooting water at a target or basketball, and you have the option of using the DualSense controller's motion controls for these, which simulates that feeling of actually playing these fairground games. Then when on the rides, if you lift your controller into the air, Peter throws his arms up. At this point, Insomniac are just showing off. It's an absolute masterclass in immersion, and the action sequence that follows is something I thought I'd only ever dream about. A major action set piece in an amusement park with Spider-Man having to save roller coaster riders. It is intense. Also, when playing basketball, this line that comes out of Peter, the way it comes out, makes me really want a pissing minigame. I want to aim my controller like it's my cock. Coney Island is also where Miles Morales meets Mysterio for the first time. A reformed Quentin Beck seeking to use his talents to make waves in the immersive virtual reality entertainment industry. And what follows is a bloody rhythm game. What? It's also just as well I know Miles' theme like the back of my hand because you're DJing an EDM version of Miles' theme. This is not only a hilarious subversion, but it rewards people who simply listen to the soundtrack of the previous game. That is on another level. This game also sees the return of some of the less desirable elements of that first game that I absolutely didn't miss in the Miles Morales game. We have the return of the science puzzles and Mary Jane's stealth missions. The science puzzles are very different to in the first game, mind you. These relate specifically to projects that Harry and Peter are working on at the Emily May Foundation, but they're a lot less mathematic than in the first game, and feel a bit more involved. At the same time, they're also quite a bit shorter, with less waiting for the flashy visuals, which are now a lot snappier and more stimulating. The majority of these only relate to the Emily May Foundation side quests, so they're mostly optional. These are, on a whole, a huge improvement over the science puzzles of the first game. I'm honestly happy to play these as a breather from the high-flying action. So good job, Insomniac, you made these work. Then there's the Mary Jane stealth missions, which have also seen a complete overhaul. So she spent some time training with Silver Sable, and is kitted out with a Sable weapon, so she's less the helpless duckling that she was in the first game. While it's very wise to stay hidden, and I don't really think there's any way to brute force these missions, if you are caught by someone, there are ways to take them out, and hide from enemy attacks. She can still distract enemies like before by throwing pebbles and knocking objects, but now you can use this to lure enemies to you, and then take them out with your Sable weapon. MJ can also sprint now too. If you do get attacked by an enemy, you need to find cover and wait for MJ to recover from her injury. Once that's done, smooth sailing. So, these new MJ missions were also a major improvement upon the first game. It's much more involved now. There are ways to speed up the pace and more ways to strategize. It also helps that there are significantly less of these missions than there were in the first game, with, if I remember right, only 3 missions in this playstyle for this game, and they're all a lot more high stakes than before. This isn't just sneaking around a villain art gallery trying not to get caught by gangsters. These are high stakes. Moving through a hunter's hideout to rescue Dr. Connors, or literally hiding from the symbiote-infected Spider-Man who's gone out of control. MJ's missions have such a nightmarish atmosphere that makes you feel utterly powerless, but she's a lot less helpless to play as than in the first game, meaning that the feeling of dread is imposed by the atmosphere and stakes, rather than a playstyle that allows little room for maneuver. If you want a strictly Spidey experience, I can see why you might feel like this is a bit of a roadblock, but taking the MJ missions and making them into survival horror was a fantastic move, which made these missions genuinely really cool. Gotta applaud Insomniac Games for not just ditching what didn't work about the first game, but instead making it work. This is incredibly compelling gameplay. There's even a side mission where you play as Miles Morales' love interest Haley, and use motion controls to make graffiti art. Insomniac, calm down. This is insane. Oh my god! Yes! When you are first introduced to Venom, you get to play as him, which I figured was just a pipe dream. But it's here, and it's glorious. He has his own signature moves. He even has his own facial expressions and poses in the photo mode. My only regret is that we only get to play as him for the one mission, and I wish we had some means of playing as him in the open world. Maybe that's for a future DLC down the line, who knows. But with Kraven being the main antagonist and all the damage he deals to New York to the lives of our protagonists, having us play as Venom for Kraven's final showdown is bloody genius. It is beyond cathartic as Venom deals the finishing blow. You as the player want to kill Kraven, and Spider-Man won't do that, so they let you play as someone that will. Insomniac Games, did you just become my soulmate? This is just... From a gameplay standpoint, this is like nothing we've had before. Again, familiar elements are all here, but they've been taken to new levels and remixed. While some stones do remain unturned, such as the 360-degree wall running and wall combat, this is easily the most comprehensive Spider-Man gameplay experience to date. I was trying to be realistic with my expectations, saying, oh, this might be a great game, but as a Spider-Man fan, as someone who's played the previous Insomniac Spider-Man games, this probably isn't gonna, blow my mind or anything. It's just gonna be more of a good thing. No way, Jose. Bruh. Just give me a minute to compose myself, okay? Coach Brett, take over the show.
What's up, guys? It's Coach Brett interrupting this video for a little bit of movement. We're gonna do some squats. So stand up from whatever chair or seat that you're sitting in And what I want you to do is get into a nice square position, making sure that your feet are flat on the ground. You're going to then slowly drop down into the seat until your butt barely touches the seat, and then drive straight back up. I want you to do 10 to 20 reps for about 2 to 3 sets, and you should be good to go. Hey guys, I'm Brett Owens, and I'm excited to introduce you to True Capacity, your health and fitness game changer. And at True Capacity, we got options. We got a body weight program where all you need is just a little bit of determination and your own body weight. We've got a minimal equipment program where you can maximize your potential with just the essentials. And then we have a full commercial gym access program where all you really need is just access to a gym and everything it has to offer. So if you're ready to transform, we're ready to help you and hold your hand along the way. Just click the link below and let's get started today. Excited to see you guys in there. Peace.
All right, we're back. So, as either Spidey, the jumbo-sized New York map has plenty of things to do, including different character-specific side stories which range from just clearing out some caches and gaining tech parts, to ending up surprisingly substantial, being proper, side storylines, their own games in a way. You've got one where you're taking on Cletus Cassidy alongside Wraith. You've got Miles going to rescue civilians from the malfunctioning Mysteriums, which result in a boss fight against a digital version of Mysterio. And there's more than even just that. You've got photo missions, this time no longer pertaining to landmarks, but to life in NYC. And on top of all that, you've got the Friendly Neighborhood app returning from Spider-Man Miles Morales. This time accessible by both Miles and Peter, which can range from some fairly basic missions to more personal stories as you get to know more of the residents inhabiting this version of New York City. Then atop that, there are just random crimes going on around New York City as before. They've done a bit more to change things up this time though, with battles against hunters, arsonists that are setting fires to buildings and tankers, symbiotes. Sometimes you need to take a civilian to an ambulance or the hospital, and you can no longer kill them like you could in the previous games. I've tried. I tried jumping in the water, didn't work, it just swims with them. I tried jumping from a skyscraper. Fall damage doesn't apply when you got a civilian in your arms. It just won't let you kill the civilian. Damn it, I'm playing the wrong game here, clearly. I don't understand Spider-Man, clearly. The car chases from the previous games also return, and I won't lie, these got repetitive in the previous 2 games. Well, they've done things a bit differently here. They've mitigated it a little. As you kind of hang from the back of them before stopping the vehicle with a QTE, there is no more button mashing to catch the car correctly, nor do you have to fight any enemies after. They've made it much quicker this time, and I honestly appreciate that. There's also these Spider-Verse-themed spider bots hidden around the city for you to collect. I haven't gotten them all yet, so please don't spoil where this is going, but I'm figuring this is just a fun little way to tie in with Across the Spider-Verse, especially given that Insomniac Spider-Man did make an appearance in that film. Just a nice, tasteful way of doing kind of the corporate synergy thing, you know? Although, where do you go from here? How do you top this game? I mean, a Spider-Verse game, maybe? But that feels at odds with the whole Doc Ock and Norman thing. Maybe after that. I mean, the next one is probably the finale. They killed off a lot of people in this one, a lot of stories ended in this one, and Doc Ock declared his plan the final chapter, so I'm assuming the next one is the finale, and maybe after that we could get a Spider-Verse game. With multiplayer, and a cel-shaded art style. I'm getting ahead of myself. Now, of course, doing these side quests and missions nets rewards. You can level up your Spidey like before, assign new suit features, continuously add to your skill tree, and of course, unlock new suits for both Peter and Miles. The suit selection for Peter is a bit smaller than before, however, they've made up for this by allowing different color combinations for most of the suits, except the movie suits for some reason. My main go-to suits for my first playthrough were Peter in the red and navy blue classic suit, evoking some serious Ditko vibes, and Miles in his classic suit from Spider-Man Miles Morales. I just like it better than his new, more teched-out suit. These look like the quintessential versions of these characters to me. As for the black suit, this is where things get a bit muddy. So I'm gonna be honest, I'm not a huge fan of the black suit's design in this game. This design reminds me a lot of that meme where it's like an MCU suit versus a comic suit, and the MCU version just has a load of lines on it. I think this suit is that meme made flesh. So, between missions, basically I started grinding, so that I could reach the level required to unlock the Raimi version of the black suit instead. I mean, I really wanted the comic one for this story because I don't like to put him in movie suits for the first playthrough, at least not in this one. But a much higher level was required for that, so I just went with the Raimi one, right? And you know what? The Raimi black suit means a lot to me. It's a suit that just means a lot to me. And so I grinded for hours, only to find that the story missions that yield the black suit force you into the default version. I tell you, the suit I needed was a bloody clown suit. Actually, that'd be kind of awesome, a clown suit variant for Spider-Man. That being said though, this black suit only lasts for a couple of missions before it evolves into the symbiote suit, quote unquote, which actually fixes all of my issues with the previous black suit and is absolutely horrifying. Also, bizarrely, the Raimi suit has expressive lenses when in photo mode, which now comes complete with posing and expression options. Best photo mode ever. I could make a video about just that. Maybe I will. Maybe I'll do that, huh? Get off my back. Alright, let's talk presentation, because this game is one of the earlier examples of what a next-gen game can be. It runs at a silky smooth 60 frames per second with ray tracing on, and that is in the performance mode, but there is an alternative fidelity mode with textures up-res to 4K running at 40 frames per second. So the fidelity mode produces a slightly nicer image, literally looking pretty much photorealistic, while the performance mode boasts a smoother experience. I personally opted for the performance mode because I don't have a 4K TV, so I don't think I could truly appreciate the fidelity mode. That said, of course, I export my videos in 25 frames per second, so you're not gonna see that. That's just for me. Some things are just for me, okay? I don't share these things. And I certainly am not sharing an extra 35 frames per 30. Oops, I tripped on my sass. Details like reflections, lighting, god rays, hair detail, heck, even the density of the city have all been ramped up. To the untrained eye, this might not look that different to Spider-Man Remastered or Spider-Man Miles Morales on PS5, but it's a more immersive experience that becomes clearer the more you look at it. We are so close to total realism now, it's insane. John Paisano returns for the soundtrack and does a great job, incorporating the more hip-hop arrangement of Miles' tracks with a more upbeat take on Peter's. Shout out to his theme for Kraven as well, which always fills me with dread. Audio elements also apply to the DualSense controller too. Not only do sounds come from the controller, but the unique rumble features can simulate things as simple as footsteps or a heartbeat. For example, when Mary Jane kisses Spider-Man, you can feel a heartbeat inside of the controller. Again, that's really advanced storytelling here. The trigger resistance is also really well utilized in QTEs that require you to pull the triggers back only a certain amount. Just calm down, just slow down. The future is so yesterday when it comes to Insomniac, who are also showing off a little more of that SSD trickery from Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart, as in the fights against Martin Lee, Mysterio, and Black Cat, for example, you'll be entering portals to entirely new locations in an instant with no load times. In fact, there's no load times in this entire game. Not that I noticed anyway. As far as PS5 exclusives go, this is absolutely a worthy showpiece as far as realism is concerned. But there's still plenty of out there visuals as well. Alright, it is worth noting though, the game isn't perfect. I've already mentioned that there's some contrived stuff going on in the story, and that there's a few missed opportunities when it comes to wall-crawling traversal, but beyond that, my only issues with this game come down to it just being kind of buggy in spots. Now, being completely fair, this is more a symptom of the state that AAA gaming is in right now, as this game is still a lot more polished than most AAA releases nowadays. This civilian here didn't get the memo that he's in danger. I had an instance during the carnival where 2 instances of dialogue from Peter, MJ, and Harry were playing at once with different dialogue. The subtitles are a literal cry for help, as they rarely match what the characters are saying and even spoil a few moments in advance. And there were a few occasions where I was soft-locked and needed to restart to the last checkpoint, which fortunately wasn't far off, but still an inconvenience nonetheless. I had an instance where Wraith was guiding me, but she got stuck behind a bin. When Miles first got his new power from Martin Lee toward the end, I was pressing the damn buttons that they were showing on screen, but they just weren't registering. These may not be significant, but they don't need defending. It's better if these problems get fixed. My buddy Dom had a glitch where Miles was just a floating head for the final cutscene, which kinda killed the vibe and ended it on a bit of a rough note. It's also disappointing that as of release, there is no new Game Plus option. This is something that will be patched in later, and I hope while they're at it, they'll also patch in mission replay, as that's one feature from the Miles Morales game that I'm sorely missing here. I want to play as Venom again, damn it! While these things don't need anyone's defense, it is also worth noting that what we are dealing with here is something else. I can absolutely look past these few and far between technical shortcomings when Marvel Spider-Man 2 elevates a superhero gameplay experience to a level that I once thought impossible. My expectations of this game were high, but I was still trying to keep things realistic, and this game straight up succeeds at being an unrealistic expectation shattered. Does that make sense? Well, anyway, in conclusion, what we have here is no ordinary game. Insomniac are the top brass when it comes to the gaming industry. Between the original Spyro trilogy, the Ratchet & Clank series, Sunset Overdrive, and their previous Spider-Man games, these guys are known for releasing some of the absolute best quality video game experiences that you can find. What Marvel's Spider-Man 2 represents is the gaming industry's absolute top of the crop, going all in for one of the best IPs out there, going out of their way to make the best possible Spider-Man game that you can possibly imagine, a game determined to be the definitive Spider-Man experience. If Ultimate Spider-Man was your favorite because of how you could explore Queens and play as Venom, well, Insomniac have now given us their version of that. If Spider-Man 2's movie game had your favorite traversal system, Insomniac have reincorporated the elements that made that one so good here. If Web of Shadows was your favorite because of the symbiote invasion, it's here. This game is upfront with its ambition, its love for Spider-Man, its commitment to immersion and storytelling. Marvel's Spider-Man 2 sets out to do it all, and it succeeds with flying colors on every single level. They nailed the gameplay, they nailed the story, they nailed the cinematic elements. It all absolutely succeeds and showcases innovation. The acting performances are as good as you'd find in the best movies. It's a technological marvel, but most of all, this game gave me a gaming experience like no other. I've had some amazing gaming experiences throughout the years, but there's one that I can think back to vividly. Batman Arkham City. I love that game to bits. There are games I think are better, but it was with that game that I just had such an incredible experience. Hooked into the story, truly wired in, and you could not pull me away from that game. I was young, I was in a very different place in life, not a care in the world, and this game was just all that mattered. Marvel's Spider-Man 2 took me back there and beyond. I was playing this game with the intention of gathering footage and reviewing it. But as I played it, none of that mattered, because I was wired in anyway. And that was that. Whether I wanted to review it or not, I would have been wired into this one. This game isn't perfect. There are things that need a patch. I'm completely willing to admit that. But look at the sheer ambition of this thing, and look how much it nails. If you ask me right now, what is the best game you've ever played? I would say, with absolute conviction, all of you at Insomniac take a bow, Marvel's Spider-Man 2. Insomniac team, take a rest. You've earned it. I've got more videos ahead discussing possibilities for the next game, so stay tuned. So guys, Marvel's Spider-Man 2, have you played it? What do you think? What do you think of my review? Comment below, discuss. And as always, if you enjoyed this video and you want to support more like it, be sure to hit subscribe, hit the like button, and in the description below is a link to the Pup Pictures Patreon, where you can get super early behind-the-scenes access and all of the updates on my upcoming Spider-Man fan film, Spider-Man Genesis, as well as being able to get your name in the credits for as little as $1 a month. A special shout out goes to the patrons in the $10 tier, who are Glad Goku, Dare Denny, Kale Bennett, That Torno, KK of Warheads, Super Hyper Mecha SP Mark II, Sirs the Skeptic, Can you believe it, guys? Spider-Man 2 just a week away! Spider-Man 2 in just a week! Woohoo! I can't wait to see all 19 inches of... Well, you're wrong, Azinko, because not a week away no more. It's out. God, update your thing, you clown. Thanks for the $10, dude. Now for the patrons in the $5 tier, we have KLX, Richard Rogers, SSS06, Dazzle Fizzle, and Vera Wild. Thank you so much to you folks for your generosity, and to all of you at home, thank you so much for watching, and have a great day. Hell yeah, guys, we made it, and it was worth every bit of the wait. God damn. God damn.